Hi everyone, great to have so many of you here. When they were calling for proposals for this conference, I had just started in a new company. And I decided that I'm going to do a bit of an unorthodox proposal. I have no idea what I will be talking about, because I will be talking about the future of what I've managed to accomplish in the 9 months in a new job. And that's why probably the description doesn't tell exactly what I'm going to be sharing. But I had this idea that from the past that I have, 23 years in testing, 3 years doing testing and development in a mixed role. From that past, I know that I have this strong preference towards changing things very slowly and in small parts. And then I have this habit of going to conferences and then bragging about the amazing big things that we've done. And I've actually never really talked about how do you get to the amazing big things. So let me start with the bragging part. I used to work, before I went to F-Secure, I used to work for a company called Granlund. 4.5 years I spent there. I have this typical history for myself that I usually spend 2 to 3 years in a company. And in some of the product companies, I get so attached to the team because the developers are wonderful. I get so attached to the product because, you get to see your handwriting in the product. And I get so attached to the business of it because you can actually not only test the product, but test the business models of the product, because all of that is intertwined. And there's no separation between customer, contractor, organizations that you have to fight, that you can use all of your energy into just trying to make that company as awesome as possible. So that's what I did at Granlund. And some of the things that I've been talking about from Granlund, I really don't want to talk about these in length today, but is that for 2 last years at Granlund, I made a point of changing the way I worked from reporting for the first 2 years, on average 4 bugs a day, even on the days when I wasn't at the office. I've always been talking a lot in conferences, so I'm not always at the office, but 4 bug reports a day, including weekends, because I was just counting rough averages. That got fixed based on my feedback. That was a huge amount. But I made a point at Granlund to change my ways of working so that for the last 2 years, I didn't write a single bug report. So I would just talk to the developers, sit with them, and use all my energy there. That's a story of its own. We would be releasing daily. We went into continuous delivery mode, but we had no test automation. That's also a story of its own. It took me years to get there. And one thing that we also did was mob programming. I introduced mob programming there. That's what made me a programmer. I talked about that yesterday when I had to do a replacement talk. But basically we were working once a week so that the whole team, 10 people, would work only on one computer. And all of these are very radical changes in the ways that we think of what normally we do in projects nowadays. And whenever I am in a project, I kind of like to think of the ways on how do I describe what I actually do there. I nowadays think of myself as a feedback fairy, so I'm not a wizard as such necessarily. I'm a feedback fairy, like a fairy godmother who comes with the great news of us missing something. Usually we talk about illusions that need to be broken. People believe something firmly that isn't quite true. It might be that they believe that the software works better than it does, and they need to be pointed out that, it doesn't quite. And a lot of times it might also be that we think that the customer might want to pay for this feature that we're developing right now. And I go side by side with the business people to see the customer and try to make them close a deal so that the customer actually pays us money before we implement. And that's an amazing test case to show that they actually didn't want it, not enough to pay for it. So there's all kinds of things where you need feedback. But I've come to the conclusion that over the years, I've been a test manager, I've been a test researcher, I do a lot of public presentations, but I've chosen my role. I am now just a tester. I am a regular tester employed in a regular Agile development project. One team, I sit with my team, and I do exactly the things that you would expect a tester to do in a team. I focus more on exploratory side, but that's still what I do. And I kind of try to explain what that means with the 4 C words there. I'm often a catalyst. I just sit amongst the developers. They look at me and say, oh, you'd want me to click here. Crash. Oh, you'd want me to try a bit of different data set. Oh, yeah, I would. So again, maybe crash. And again, they might look at me and say, yeah, I tried it once, you know me. You'd want me to do it 2 or 3 times. Oh, the second time didn't work. So sometimes I feel like I am just me being around. It's like I'm a catalyst and a conscience. I remind people of things they should be doing. And I try to teach my teams into doing that without me saying a word. And then so that I can remove myself and that culture stays around. So kind of like quality coaching in a way. But I also, of course, I do test a lot myself. I'm also a cheerleader. Over the 23 years in testing, I've realized that we as testers often talk about the negative stuff. And everybody actually talks a lot about the negative stuff because the negative stuff is the empirically correct and the right thing to say. There's usually like you can show the evidence and this is how it works. The bugs, easy to talk about. But I tend to also nowadays try to focus on making sure that the positive stuff gets talked about. And that's particularly important in Finland, by the way, where the culture is that you never say anything nice. Being quiet means that you're doing a good job. So sometimes you need to have someone who actually notices things and says things out loud. And of course, as a tester, I'm always the critical thinker. So let me take a bit more of time to go through something and verify, for example, on the threat models that was at the previous sessions, let me verify that whatever model we build actually matches whatever the product is doing when I'm exploring. That's kind of part of my everyday life. But this is kind of what I've grown up to be after 23 years in testing. And for me, it's a good thing to remember that the software industry doubles every 5 years. This is from Uncle Bob Martin, one of the software development gurus. He points out that that's how it is. 5 years, there's twice as many of us. And that means that in a typical group like this, half of us have less than 5 years of experience if we are a representative group of the industry. What I do and what I tell that I do after 23 years should probably be different from the person who does things for the second year in their career. So you can choose any of the bits and pieces that I talk about and apply them early on in your career. There's years to come for you to grow into any direction that you feel that is the right one then for you. And that's kind of how I look at the career as well. I'm not done yet. 23 years is just a scratch. It's just the start on this whole thing. But 9 months ago, I took another scratch into my career with all of the background that I had, with all of the 30 talks in conferences a year, with the people who come to me, which is still weird in these conferences, and shaking my hand saying, I've heard about you, it's so great to meet you. And like, I am just a tester, seriously, normal person, nothing more. So, for me, from that perspective, I went into a job interview 9 months ago, and it was a bit of an unusual experience. I also wrote a blog post about it, because usually in a job interview, they ask you about, what you can bring into the company. And for me, they were asking what kind of a position we can give you so that you would join us. And I think that's kind of a nice place to be in. I said, I want to go to conferences. Yeah, how many? And I said, I want to work as just a tester. Yeah, sure. That's amazing. And I just ended up, just finding the role that I kind of felt that I wanted. But the role also, the way it turned out, is that I'm not really responsible for anything. I'm just a team member. I am, just a tester in that team. My team has 3 developers, 1 test automation developer, and myself as an exploratory tester and some seniority in this testing side. And we're all, the 5 of us together, responsible in that team. And the other 5 teams that I work with, 3 in Helsinki and 2 in Poland, I share a lot of work with them. We're all responsible together. There's no like, you do this, you do that, but we coordinate and identify things. And that's just kind of what I wanted. So we'll talk about that a bit more. But going into these kind of companies and they ask you like, what do you want to do? A lot of times you feel like I want to be a manager, I want a lot of power, but I want it to be just a tester. But I also had this feeling that they kind of assume that I come in with this like a senior attitude. I'm like, just do what I say. I have all of these nice things that I've done in the previous companies. Now we can, fast forward and tomorrow we're going to be doing continuous deployment. And it just doesn't work that way, even if you have a lot of background. So I believe in these kind of ideas that, people really in these conferences, we like a dramatic story. We would love to hear how we can make an overnight change. But all of the changes that we talk about here, I believe, by heart, are not overnight changes, but they are a group of people consistently doing small changes. Sometimes even changes, some of the best of the changes are ones where people around you don't even notice what's going on. So I wanted to show you this little video to give you an idea. So this is a gradual change test video, one of the many psychology side videos. And in this short film, you're supposed to try to spot a change. So, did you see a change? There was a very, very slow change. There's another version of the video so that you can see what's changed. I hope the resolution is not playing us. I think you can see that quite clearly now. At least I can see it. There's like blinking going on in the left-hand side. The reason why I show this video is that some of the best changes, the changes that make out to be really, really big differences in our company, they can start from an individual small person doing things with others in collaboration over a long time so that the others don't even realize that you're changing them. And the techniques that you use for this kind of change is pairing, sharing, going for coffee, asking for advice, taking advice, and experimenting, not only on the things that you think should be done, but the things that other people are kind of feeding into you. So having that discussion is what is needed. So one of the reasons why my entry to F-Secure sounds really, really fancy is that they kind of gave me the position that I wanted, but I needed to, kind of tell you that I have a bit of a history. I've been there before. We've been there before at some point together. And 10 years ago, I spent 2.5 years at F-Secure. So when I joined F-Secure as a completely new tester into that organization, I already had, I didn't know exactly who I would be meeting there because I knew that they had a lot of these collaboration negotiations where people end up changing jobs, whether by choice or not. But I had already been there, and there might be some people that I know. And for me, it was like I went home. So after 1 week at the office, I felt like I already had been there forever. So kind of all the old experience came back to me. But in the 10 years that I was gone, a lot of things had also changed. When I left, we had very little automation at F-Secure, test automation. Pretty much non-existent. And somehow magically, when I had left and stopped being a blocker for that by convincing everyone that it's a bad idea to invest in it, they had done it. And actually now I think that honestly saying, sometimes people like me, the exploratory testers, talking against it, making other people feel like they shouldn't try doing that kind of things, is one part of why we end up failing. So I was happy to see that we had test automation, but then again, I also, of course, had learned a lot about test automation in the other companies where I had worked. And that was pretty much the big difference. There was more test automation, there were less people like me, less people who would take exploratory testing into heart and who would be kind of like living and breathing the idea of finding complicated bugs on time so that we would be able to find them. And a lot of the discussions that I needed to have in the beginning were around the idea that we've already tested it. See, here's the test automation. I'm like, yeah, it's interesting that we've already tested it. 2 days I spent on it and $30 I found. That's kind of my perspective on it. It was already tested, sure. So can we talk about what we actually did test instead of having this one bundle of things? But there were a lot of things that I felt that were not changed while I was gone. And one of the big things that had not changed was that when I came to this team that I was supposed to work in, they had not done a release in 6 months. They had been doing the project for 6 months. It was a new project that they had started, a new team that they had gathered, but there was no releases. And there was actually no release in sight. Also, as it was a new team and the organization had changed in the sense that there were no longer any Scrum Masters, team and a product owner. That was the concept of Agile now. There was also this idea of very much like an individual work, like everyone in their own corners and specialties and taking their own work. But also, since Agile, not much of a way of organizing that work so that it would be an easy thing for a new person to come in. And it really took me 3 months to realize that the main developer that was supposed to give me information, he believed so strongly in pulling the information that when I, as a new person, didn't know to ask for information, because I didn't know what information I was supposed to ask, I had been, fighting this uphill battle pretty much all the time on trying to figure out even which systems did I need access to so that I can do my work. So that was an interesting experience. But I wanted to lift 3 points that I really worked on in an incremental fashion, talking to people, working with people, trying to find the smallest possible changes so that I could make a significant difference over the 9 months that I've been there. And seriously, 9 months ago, I wasn't sure if I can do anything, so it was kind of nice to see that in hindsight, there's some changes that have actually happened. The first one that we're going to be talking about is the capability to release. So they had not done a release for a while. Then the other one is the teamwork. How does a tester even get information if nobody volunteers anything, and if there's existing structures that make that even harder? So I had to struggle with some of that stuff. And the third part is this whole Agile Requirements and working together with the product owners. So that's the third part that we're going to be looking into a bit. So the first one, capability to release, is really kind of like, I feel like I'm pushing this based on my old experiences. I've taken us to a journey towards continuous deployment. The system that we're building has a client. It's a Windows client, C++ development, and Python on the test automation side. And it has a backend, which is Java and JavaScript, and tons of tools in that ecosystem. And the backend project had already learned to deliver every 2 weeks, but the client-side project was a new one, and they had no kind of like a history of joining this 2-month or 2-week cycle. They were asked to do that, we were asked to do that, and it actually took us 2 months, pretty much exactly since I joined, before we made our very first release, and since then we've put a lot of effort into it. So I wanted to show you where we got first. So I have a habit of writing these team capability stories, kind of like the things we're not able to do, but we should be able to do. There's another one that is on our list right now saying turn the 4-hour release into a 4-minute release, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. But this is the one that we've managed to complete in the 9-month period. So for us, when we started making the very first release, it actually took us about the 2 months. The second release took us 4 days. The third release took us 4 days. The fourth release took us 4 days. And then I needed to start thinking about ways of really changing this. And the changes, kind of how I introduced them, was to realize that there was an annual kind of like a clock work in an organization. You know, there's this collaboration review or meetings, annual review meetings where you talk about what's your skill set and how you're developing your skills for next year, and you set goals for the whole year. And I managed to talk to my manager on time just for that cycle, so that I convinced him to put this goal into my team's goals. And even though we were delivering features and that was kind of coming from the product owner side, this was the feature or the thing that the team needed to somehow figure out, then told by our manager, as part of us getting bonuses. So it's a bit of a gamble, of course, from my side, thinking that we can change the 4-day releases into anything faster. I have no knowledge on how that's done in this particular organization, and if that can be done within the time frame that we set together with the manager that we wanted to do it. But gambling on my bonuses and other people's bonuses in a shared way, committing to that, putting myself at risk as well, was kind of what I needed to do. And the reason why I, as a tester, really push for this kind of change on releasing is that, first of all, I believe that when something is painful, you should do more of it. When something is hard to do, when you practice, it gets easier. And even the testers who have a habit of tolerating a lot of tedium, like boredom, we do things repeatedly, a lot more than developers. But when we do that in a team with developers and we're forced to kind of like go through the pain of hard releases, we will figure out a way. 5 smart people, that's gonna happen. But I kind of bring in this as a tester because I believe that this continuous delivering regularly, whenever a feature is ready, it fundamentally has changed in my previous projects. The way we do testing, the way I'm able to do exploratory testing, the way I'm able to take whatever time I need for a feature to analyze that from various perspectives, and then make sure that all the feedback together with the team gets accommodated and acted on if needed. So I can test each change separately. We can have human-sized discussions on the changes. The developers really care about the feedback because we're all working on the same thing at the same time on a shorter time frame. And the whole idea of the necessary amount of manual work, including testing, but also including manual programming, which is, by the way, what we still do, into the project is kind of a big deal. To get this done, I had to talk for about almost 6 months on a daily basis with people, and I made these little notes on how people reacted to me. I didn't find a way of visualizing those in a nice way, so I didn't bring them into the slides. But my notes remind me how the product owner in the beginning said, there are no Windows products that can be released on a daily basis. That is not doable. And how after 3 months the message was changed to, yeah, sure, maybe we could be giving the new users a new version, new joining users, a new version on a daily basis. And then just, update the other ones on a monthly basis. Maybe actually there's these ways. And you find those ways when you keep on, talking about things and finding things out and figuring out what you could do. The developers were telling me that they will never complete another feature if they have to do these releases all the time. So I also introduced another capability type of a story where the only developer who could do releases at that time in the manual 4-day process would have to teach it to all of the people in the team so that we could all share the pain of having to be wasting our lives on that. And actually, since he taught that to the second person, he hasn't pretty much touched it himself. And that kind of helped with getting rid of a lot of the complaints. But there's still a lot of work to be done to get to the 4 minutes that I want. There's some really big things around signing automatically, because basically if those signatures leak in any way from a security company, that's the end of the company. So I'm kind of dealing with very big things with that change. And I expect that within 2 years I can tell that we are in the 4-minute releases. But for me, it still is almost a daily, at least a weekly discussion to have with various stakeholders to remind them that I haven't given up on this, and I don't believe that the impossible to change is true. Things change when you change them. And I get a lot of no's, but then I ask somebody else and I ask in a different way. And the persistence is really, really kind of the key to doing things. And again, amongst the 1.5 hour sessions of testing, focused testing, you really need to take a walk around the building so that your brain still works when you're doing actual testing work. And using those moments, not to go for a smoke, but to go for driving something bigger. That's kind of what I suggest people would do. The second theme that I wanted to talk about is the self-organized teamwork. So getting from this idea of being in the same room, being a real agile team, like most agile teams are happy with what we have right now, into this like real collaboration. And again, it's a journey that is on its way for me, and I have kind of like an idea of where I would like to see us as going, but I'm also open to having my team change my point of view. In the interview that I had with my manager, I told to him about this idea of mob programming that I had really, really grown to love in my previous company. The idea that you would have one computer that the whole team uses, you would have a screen that everyone looks at the same time, and then you would take turns on who's on the keyboard, who is navigating, so speaking to the person at the keyboard. And you would rotate around usually every 4 minutes. I really wanted to do more of this because I had done this in my previous company. And I had seen things that I didn't even realize I could change because of the collaboration. You can see in this picture, this is from Agile 2012 conference, if I remember correctly. You can see in this picture, there's this little girl there. She's 9 years old. She joined in a software development conference in an exercise where they were doing a test-driven development kata of tic-tac-toe. Just looking at the guys doing it first, saying, hey, this looks like a fun game, I think I can join. And as a tester who didn't program 2.5 years ago, well, I have somewhat of a programming background, but I kind of had forgotten about it. I felt like that little girl when I started making my team do this, and we would refactor code and write code together. I did it because the team didn't then communicate, but I wanted to do kind of similar thing with this team. Well, things don't always go as you wish for, so I have a daily habit of saying, we wouldn't have this problem if we were mobbing. Yeah. You already know what I'm going to say next, mobbing. Yeah, you know what I'm going to say again, mobbing. So I kind of, feel like I'm repeating myself, and I'm trying to, come to that with a smile. But again, reminding people that I'm still not given up on the idea that we would work in this format. At F-Secure, I've managed to mob about once a month, but I have not managed to mob even once with my 3 developers. There's a wall. The manager says he wants us to mob, but he will never force us to do anything. The power is with the team. So I need to find a way of convincing the team if I want to. I mobbed with the team next door. We had all of the developers and then testers from a couple of different other teams work for a full day on performance testing. And the power that we got when all the 9 of us knew exactly the problems of performance that we needed to solve after that day, was amazing. It wasn't like one person had to convince the others that we're having problems. We lived through testing those problems for that day. And while we were mobbing on the performance testing, we actually got even more other teams joining in the middle of the day, realizing that we were crashing their systems like crazy, going for a couple of 100 users instead of a couple of million, that is the goal. And again, a few months later, we have fixed all of those issues. So that's normal for testing. But what was different in mobbing in that case was that we really had a bigger audience who already knew and had a shared understanding of where we would be driving for. And the other kind of mobbing that I've managed to do is mostly with testers. So as a tester in this organization, I can tell other testers to come and talk to me, come and work with me, pair with me, mob with me. And whenever I organize a session, they show up. But it's still, it's not the same as actually working on the things that you're normally supposed to work on with the same people as you're supposed to work on. So my team has these nice people. There's me. This is my daughter's drawings, actually. That's apparently how I look like. I wonder when I will have those nice braids that I could actually put that way, but maybe the thinness of the braids is actually very representative. But I identify as a tester, but I often feel that I need to add the exploratory into the words as well. I have another tester. I could also call her a developer. Actually, this is now drawn in the wrong gender. My tester is another woman in the team. She is a 25 years into programming in C++ developer and works on the test automation part on Python, which is completely new language to her now that she works on it. And most of the time, I have an idea of a thing I never want to manually test again, and I just go and tell her, like, hey, you be my, I could say, little slave. Great collaboration companion, that's what I really should be saying. I have this idea that we really need to pay attention to this in this way. Maybe you could focus on adding that to the automation side. I try to pair with her, but again, she is not a pairing person, so most of the time, no. And then I have application programmers, 3 of them. They're actually all men, but in the world of my daughter, she believes that she is already a programmer. All of the programmers of the future will be women. That's how it will be. But this is kind of like the roles in my team. And everyone has very specific ideas of what they would be doing. And I find myself to be the only one who goes and writes the test automation code every now and then. And last week, I just fixed a production bug because it was harder to convince the developers to fix a thing that was between 3-4 teams than actually to go and do that myself, pairing up with each of the individuals to get the necessary information. We also had a person with the role of a product owner. When I joined the company, he sat with us in the same room. So kind of like a all the time available product owner sounds like a dream thing. But it was actually really, really difficult when I joined into the team because the developers would talk directly at him and he would never talk about the overall thing to the whole team. So it was like one-on-one discussions with him. He knew about all of the things. And on the day when he called me, his tester, I went to his manager and suggested that maybe he should move out of the room. Because again, product owner is not a project manager. And when a product owner starts to act like a project manager, it becomes a hindrance for the team growth. So we ended up having this discussion about moving him. He did actually move into the world of other product owners. And the change that I didn't expect, well, I expected the change that developers would now start talking in the room because they couldn't get the direct answer in quiet from that one person. And we could have like an established way of bringing him regularly into the room to have those discussions with us, which really happened. But the change I didn't expect was that there was actually a lot of work on the product management side that he had not had time to do because the developers always interrupted him. And now he had the chance of focusing on that work. So it made life better for him from the work that he was supposed to be doing, and our teamwork improved a lot in that sense. I also worked a lot in this team with the idea that I really want to figure out a way of us learning to talk to each other. And a way of learning to talk or forcing us to talk is that I wouldn't write any bug reports. I went on 6 months out of the 9 without writing a single bug report. And that was an uphill battle. Out of all the battles that I had at F-Secure right now, that one was the most uphill battle. There's a strong history of Jira-driven development. And when there's not a ticket in Jira, there's a lot of fear that, someone might, think that I'm doing the wrong thing and maybe, somehow the message isn't distributed well enough. Nobody reads the stuff from Jira anyway. But there was a lot of conceptual ideas of why Jira exists and why it's so relevant. But what I did instead is I knew that writing a good bug report would usually take me 10 minutes. I would go and sit next to the developer for the 10 minutes and say hey, can I show you this bug? Now that I already interrupted you, wouldn't you fix it? Come on, let's do something. And some of them, they took it really well. I was timing it so that I wouldn't be interrupting them all the time, but I would kind of notice when they were between tasks and it was the right time to go and do that. So I put a lot of effort and intensity into doing this. But it really helped me build the relationships with the developers, even with the ones who insisted then from the other teams that I will write them a bug report so that they it's according to their processes, that's what they have to do. Even those ones, the fact that I had shown them the bug before they got the report, it made it a lot faster to address those bugs and understand which ones of them were relevant and which ones of them were not. And coming from the idea that they didn't really have much of information to give me as a new person in the organization, I think this was, for me, it was a lifesaver that I had this idea of a way of working so that I would get to know the people, I would find the people, and I would insist on talking to them. You can see that I mentioned here the word 6 months, which means that I no longer do that because I believe in experiments very heavily. And an experiment we needed was to use Jira because actually my team, I wasn't the only one who wasn't using Jira. None of them were using Jira. And while I was very strong on replacing it with the right activities, I can't say it was always true with everyone else. They kept forgetting things a lot more. I have this personal backlog of post-it notes. My wall next to me is full of post-it notes. There's a lot of organization in that on how I remember things that I need to park for a while. But that wasn't true for everyone else, so I needed to remind a lot of people about things that they were almost about to forget. So we made an agreement with our boss that for 3 months, which is soon over, we're going to be using Jira and then we're going to be analyzing which way we want to go forward. So I have a chance in 5 days, I think, 5 days later, to talk about this with my team and try to convince them that post-it notes on the wall is again the way that we would be working on instead of this whole let's talk through Jira which kind of comes easily when you're used to it. Another thing that I did a lot is pass around these kind of stupid little posters. We have a SharePoint drive, and I would, take a picture or write text and take a picture of noticing somebody doing something well. Just, making a point of paying attention to good stuff that was happening and saying that so that I would share it to them and their managers. And interestingly, it's very nice to talk to your own manager about your colleagues, mostly in a positive way. So when you remember the positive stuff, when you write that down and you distribute that, it kind of changes also the tone in how things work. And I feel I might be heard a little better because a lot of the stuff that I come with is positive. And then when I come with a negative message, which I of course do as well, then it's kind of it's just part of that. It's not always with just the negative messages. So these kudo cards are really nice, but any format of delivering, I noticed you did this, thank you messages. I find that that's been a very helpful thing for me in changing the team collaboration, which is the overall theme here. And I've also really noticed that I really don't need to be assigned to be responsible for, fixing bugs or testing certain things or making sure releases in a particular way. I believe that the developers eventually are the ones who will carry the consequences of bad release. They will be there 24/7 fixing whatever we broke. I get to be the one who says, I told you so, quite often. And that's not really helpful, but I try to not do too much of that. But it also frees me as a tester to kind of look at my team as like, I don't need to be particularly responsible for doing something. I can always volunteer. So for example, the user interface of our application, I've worked a lot with that because that was an easy part to work on. And I worked with fixing bugs that seem to be taking too long compared to whatever they are. So they are usually severe bugs, but not that complicated to fix. And of course, then pairing with developers is the way that I would do this. So just show up and ask until you get enough answers. The third theme that I found myself incrementally improving over the last 3 months is Agile Requirements. So again, this is definitely a topic that wasn't kind of my territory. There was a product owner who is sort of supposed to be doing this. But when the product owner wants to talk about stories and the team wants to talk about tasks, and they haven't found a way of really putting together the story and the task and the incremental development, when the development team would rather do sort of like, half things or really big things, either one but never just the right size, the requirements were a bit difficult. And I really emphasized a lot in the discussions this idea that we are really not here to just make a great product or a great company, but rather we are here to talk about our customers and how we make our customers awesome. I absolutely love Kathy Sierra's message. Like, how do we make us awesome as a team? How do we make our customers more awesome? And how would that show up in the things that we put on our backlog? At exactly Valentine's Day, I seem to have grown tired. I started in September, late September. At Valentine's Day, I had grown tired of looking at the product owner not managing to do a product backlog for us. So I drew one on a very simple tool. The different colors, their stories, team capabilities are the purple ones. There's organizational capabilities, and then there's stories that the product owner doesn't seem to understand so much that he could even explain to us what the hell he wants. So they are red. And this was supposed to be the project that we deliver by end of June. So we're almost there right now. And I took a new picture from yesterday, or 2 days ago actually. Exactly the same work turned out to be like this. And we've done most of it. There's a lot of stuff that we actually don't need to necessarily do, that it's gotten split. But I keep track of this so that we can talk about what we actually did, what we actually tested and delivered. And I find that these visual mechanisms are usually much more relevant than the other ways of doing it. So all of this time, I was just a tester. I wasn't an organizational developer. I was just a tester. I can't say how many bugs I've reported, but I have reported a significant amount of bugs. I've tested new features that have completely emerged during this time. I've collaborated with the team. I've sat through tens of threat modeling sessions, figuring out how to work with the security stuff around this. I've driven things to completion and made sure we deliver on a regular basis. And I'm really happy to notice that the things that were impossible, like making a release once a week, because it only takes 4 hours now, are now possible. And I'm pretty confident that in a year, small change by small change, I could push us towards the idea of let's put a new version into production on a daily basis whenever things are ready. And that means that if you need 2 weeks of testing, you will do 2 weeks of testing. It's just the release day that is a daily thing. And things are completed as they are. So I wanted to sum this up shortly on these ideas of why do I keep doing this? I find that I've been telling everyone for pretty much 20 years that I believe that we should have this attitude towards work, that when we come to work, we come with the attitude that tomorrow we're a little better than we were yesterday. And exploratory testing is a great position to be in to be able to do that. You learn so much when you stay open to learning, looking at an application and letting it be your external imagination, whisper back to you and say where the problems might lie. And then just, don't necessarily only report them. If you feel like a way of extending your abilities would be to do something more, stretch a little. Make sure that you think about stretching on a continuous time frame. So I kind of think of this as we are trying to build ourselves into being the 10x versions of ourselves. These numbers here, all of them, are 10x of each other. With overhead, these two are 10x if the overhead is most of the amount of there. Compound interest here, when you start doing things early on, you might have almost exactly the same sums that you have to pay over long term, depending on whether you start late or early. And the same thing, actually, even more with the time. For saving up to your retirement or trying to become the best professional you could be, if you start at age of 18 versus if you start at age of 60, there's so much more that you can accrue over time that it actually is exactly the same thing that you need to invest in order to get the same result. So I kind of draw this as this image. This is Llewellyn Falco's image. If you invest an hour into learning every day, and it would give you 1% increase in your abilities. You learn to use a little library so that you don't have to write hundreds of lines of code. You learn to communicate better so that you get understood easier. If you get 1% better, in a month, you're already better than the person who doesn't have the attitude of getting better every day. And in a year, you're already 5 times better than the person who isn't trying actively to improve. So a core thing for us is to become better so that we remain in an enjoyable position. So I believe, this is kind of my favorite thing to say, I believe that it's good to pretend things are possible, then ask for them, and be ready to work for them yourself as well, of course, but don't let yourself, because you are the one who's telling things to yourself. Don't let yourself to be the one who tells that these things can't be done. Surprising things can be done when you just set your mind to it. That's the lesson for today.
Thank you. Can you give any suggestions how to find the time to improve, as our time at work is usually quite occupied by other co-workers, managers, Jira, and so on?
How do I find the time? It's not that hard to kind of like think of your day as you have 8 hours, you take 1 hour into learning and 7 hours into regular work. There's so much time that we can spend on various meetings without actually doing anything. So again, organizing the work differently so that you would have, for example, what I try to do, have less meetings in calendar and have more extempore meetings that tend to be shorter and, at least for my mindset, less disruptive, in the sense of when I have something in my calendar, I start an hour before looking where I have to be, and I'm not doing anything big, and then, like flexibility in your time and not planning too much, but just start doing stuff. That's how it works.
Thank you.
Take a moment every now and then.
Thank you, Maaret, for the beautiful speech.
Thanks.
So when you decided that you want to pass those bugs by person, not via Jira, how you make sure that this developer you address the bug is the correct one, and looking on it from another angle, how are you sure that another one in the room is not more excited about fixing this one?
So when I find something, I work in a team room. I usually talk about things out loud, so any of the 3 can volunteer. But like I tried to mention, I have developers who are very siloed in their skills still. Like there's one of the 3 who moves between components and technologies. I love him because he works with the back-end stuff and the front-end stuff, and he's my superhero. He goes everywhere and he gets stuff done. The other one is pretty much only C++, and he talks about the back-end people as if they only do configuration, belittling type of thing. So you get to know these people really quickly when you just put a bit of time into understanding what they say. And the third one is the most junior out of the four, like most recent hire coming into the team, and he clearly worked on a particular application. So there were boxes in which they were. But if there would be some other developer that could be better to help, developers tend to be lazy, and they tend to be very keen on volunteering the other names. And I think one of the things that works really well in our agile way of working is that the developers have this coffee table network where they go for coffee and talk about their stuff, and they know amazing things. So tapping into that by getting to be okay with those people, that's how I managed to do it.
Hi.
Hi.
As I understood, you haven't a Scrum Master in your team, but who organizes Agile process in that way?
So who manages Agile process when we don't have a Scrum Master?
And what you can propose for teams which hasn't Scrum Master, how to improve
who
the
have
process?
Scrum Master or don't have?
Don't have.
Okay. So for us, we don't have a Scrum Master because there's been a notion that when you don't have one, then the team don't kind of like outsource stuff that they don't want to do, but they should be doing themselves or could be doing themselves to that Scrum Master. So that's the team's responsibility to take care of it. We develop our own processes. We have our own retrospectives. We have continuous retrospectives, actually. So we pretty much talk on a daily basis on what sucks and what doesn't. I tried first having these like 2-week increments because I wanted to have something that I can see when I was a new person. But then I realized that it's all hallway discussions, and that's how it works, and it works really well as such. But if you don't have a Scrum Master and you don't have yet this idea of a team doing that work themselves, what you need is somehow getting to the idea of the team doing that themselves. Sometimes they won't, they just don't have the knowledge or the abilities. But for us, it helps that we have a team of people with all plus 20 years of experience. We've had the bad managers who are more of a nuisance for us, all of us. And we know that we can do better in making sure that we don't at least get one of those to join us. But it really depends on who your people are. If you have people who are unable and unwilling, you will need a Scrum Master to make them willing and able. If you have people who are both willing and able, you won't need a Scrum Master, and you might not even need a product owner. That's one of the changes that I'm thinking, is that we would try to free the product owner a bit more into the team kind of taking more responsibility of the features that we're developing, so that we now already are playing with the rule of 15 minutes. If the product owner doesn't give us an answer in 15 minutes, the team's answer is good enough to be implemented. Works well. And turns out the team knows or gives the same answers as the product owner. Maybe 10 years of time together has something to do with it.
Okay. Especially in regards to testing, what is the value you are trying to get out with 4-minute releases?
The value that I'm trying to get out is that we would lower the risk of each individual release, and there would be less of a hassle with the multi-team setting, so that we would get more value to the end users, so that instead of having features somewhere piled up in our inventories, they would be in use and providing value for the real users.
Hi, have you worked in your team where part of your team is a remote team, like a
Yes.
tester here, developers some 100 kilometers away? What could be advice for a team and for the communication?
So I have a team that isn't remote. We sit in the same room, but we are a team of 5 people, and our project is a team of 5 teams. And 2 of those teams are in Poland. So we are already remote, so I do have to regularly talk to the people in Poland and try to figure things out. But the way we've chosen to distribute things is that you always have developers and testers in the same location. And then you just crosstalk also amongst the locations. If you are remote, you need to build some kind of a way of sharing things on a regular basis. In my previous place of work, we had the principle of only being at the office once a week. And it was kind of nasty when some of the developers told me there that on Tuesday, we were always on office on Mondays. On Tuesday, they told me that they would like to answer my question next time they're on the office. That means next week. That's kind of awful when you're doing daily releases, not to get answers just because people are remote and try to stay that way. So it's about building the culture where you can work together. And I've seen people, for example, mobbing remotely. Haven't tried that yet with my current teams, but that's definitely on my list of things to do when I have time. So there are many things that I want to do, but I haven't done them because they're not high on my priorities yet. But I'm happy to give you more later if you want to talk about that.
You talked about these really short deployment times, and yet you also run automated tests. So I'm wondering, when are you planning to run the automated tests while doing these really, really short deployments?
I'm not sure if we ever get to the 4 minute of deployment times. That's more of what I was thinking there is more of the time. How long does it take for us to put the pieces together? So there's then mechanisms of putting some of the pieces together separately, because it's a very big system. Overall, it takes a long time to get all of that stuff together and signed and delivered to various places. But right now, where we run the automation is continuously on the daily builds. Like it's running. I think right now for us it's running on clock instead of on check-in. That's one of the things that I'd like to change. And some of the things they are run before you get to check-in. Some of the things are run before or after you've checked in. But there's a lot of work to do in the right timing of the automation so that you could make delivery faster. So I'm aware there's a lot of work in that area for us. It takes 1.5 hours to run one of our test cases, regression test cases right now. And I'm not happy with the way they're built, but I haven't yet had the time to get to the pairing that is needed in changing that. And I know who I need to bring in from other teams, but I haven't done that yet.
Thank you. And now we have time for one additional question. Thank you.
So let's say theoretically I have this colleague who's been working as long as you have, but he doesn't spend that 1 hour to improve. So how many more times better are you right now than him?
I don't know. If he hasn't, you should try the math. If he actually hasn't improved at all, then probably a lot, but I don't know. But I don't know. I have these colleagues or have had these colleagues who basically every developer, every other person around talks about, they're just running the scripts. They're never finding any bugs. They're really not enthusiastic. They kind of come to work without wanting to really come to work, but they have to because they have no other options. I think those are the people who don't have the attitude that I look for. There's maybe the 0.25% improvement version as well. But I would really like to think of this as, let's find the ways of improving even more if we can.
Thank you, Maaret.
Thank you.